There is a version of you that nobody sees, not your closest friends, not your family, and most of the time, not even you. It doesn't show up in how you dress or how you speak. It doesn't announce itself in conversations, but it is there, quietly, constantly, shaping every choice you make, every relationship you enter, every fear that stops you in your tracks. Carl Jung called this hidden dimension of the psyche the shadow, not a metaphor for evil, not a symbol of weakness, but a living, dynamic part of your psychology that holds everything you have refused to acknowledge about yourself. The insecurities you've buried, the anger you've swallowed, the desires you've judged, the grief you never allowed, the parts of you that didn't fit the image you needed to project to the world. Most people never look there, and that is precisely why those parts run their lives. Here's what's worth sitting with. You can be a fully functioning adult, educated, successful, well-spoken, and still be making your most important decisions from the unconscious floor of your mind. Your reactions in arguments, the partners you're drawn to, the way you shrink in certain rooms, the way you overreach in others, the sabotage that arrives just when things are going well. These are not accidents. They are the fingerprints of an unexamined shadow. Jung's insight wasn't simply about identifying this darker layer of the self. It was about what happens when you finally turn toward it. Because the shadow doesn't lose power when you fight it. It doesn't shrink when you pretend it isn't there. It only loses its grip when you bring it into awareness, when you stop running and start looking. What this means in practical terms is significant. When your shadow is unexamined, other people can reach you in ways you don't understand. They can trigger you, manipulate you, diminish you, not always intentionally but always effectively, because they are pressing on wounds you've never cleaned. The moment you heal those wounds, that access is gone. Nobody can pull strings you've already untangled. This is not a comfortable process. It requires an honesty that most people spend their lives avoiding. It asks you to sit with shame, acknowledge anger, recognize patterns you'd rather dismiss as bad luck or other people's fault. But on the other side of that discomfort is something that cannot be faked or bought or inherited from someone else: genuine self-possession. This video walks through exactly how the shadow controls your life, what keeps it in place, and what it actually looks like to dismantle its influence and reclaim your own authority. Not through toxic positivity, not through willpower, but through the only thing that actually works: making the unconscious conscious, ready to break free from what's been holding you back. Comment this now: I'm ready to claim my freedom. The shadow is the hidden operator. When you observe yourself honestly, without the usual filters of self-justification, something becomes uncomfortable quickly. A great deal of what you do automatically. You react before you think. You feel things before you understand them. You repeat patterns you swore you'd broken. And when someone asks why, the honest answer is, you're not entirely sure. That gap between your behavior and your understanding of it is where the shadow lives. Jung described the shadow as the unconscious portion of the personality, the storehouse of everything the conscious mind has rejected, suppressed, or simply never gotten around to examining. It forms early. Society tells you certain emotions are unacceptable, so you push them down. Your environment rewards certain behaviors and punishes others, so you build an identity around the acceptable ones and bury the rest. The buried material doesn't disappear. It collects. Over years, that collection becomes substantial, and it starts to operate on its own terms. Consider the moments in your life that feel most out of your control. The irrational anger at a passing comment, the jealousy that flares up despite your best intentions, the compulsion to undermine your own progress just when things start moving. These aren't character flaws in the way we typically use that phrase. They're messages from a part of yourself that has been waiting for attention. The shadow speaks through symptoms when it can't speak directly. What makes this particularly significant is that the shadow doesn't just affect your internal experience, it broadcasts itself externally. Your unresolved patterns are visible to others even when they're invisible to you. The insecurities you carry, the wounds you haven't addressed, the fears you've never named. People around you can sense them, even if neither of you would articulate it that way. And because humans are skilled at finding and using leverage, even unconsciously, those patterns become access points. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The shadow works against this principle directly. When it operates unexamined, the outside world becomes enormously powerful over your inner state, because your unhealed places are always reacting to stimuli before your conscious mind has a chance to weigh in. Every trigger is a proof of the shadow's reach. Every automatic response is evidence that something inside is still running the show without your input. This is the essential problem. You cannot master what you haven't acknowledged. You can work on your habits, your skills, your discipline, and those things matter. But as long as there is a portion of your psychology operating in the dark, your self-mastery has a ceiling. The shadow will find the gaps. Recognizing this is the first real act of psychological sovereignty. Not shame about the shadow's existence, not anger at yourself for having one, simply the clear-eyed recognition that something in you has been steering without permission, and that awareness alone begins to change the dynamic. The operator loses influence the moment you see it operating. Done being controlled by your own shadow. Comment this now. I take back control of my life. Projection makes you blind to yourself. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes from an unexamined shadow, and it's one of the most common and costly ways it operates. Jung called it projection, and understanding it changes the way you interpret every strong emotional reaction you have to the people around you. Projection is the mechanism by which you see in others what you refuse to see in yourself. The traits you haven't integrated, the impulses you've disowned, the emotions you've declared off limits. They don't stay quietly inside. They get pushed outward and appear to live in other people. You don't recognize the anger in yourself, so you see an angry world. You don't acknowledge your own need for control, so you perceive everyone around you as controlling. You don't admit your own tendency toward avoidance, so you label others as unreliable. The external world becomes a screen, and your shadow becomes the projector. What makes this so disorienting is how real the projections feel. The irritation you experience toward someone who seems arrogant feels like an objective response to their behavior. The contempt you feel for someone's laziness feels like a reasonable judgment. There's no internal signal telling you that what you're responding to is partly your own material coming back at you from the outside. It just feels like reality. Jung made this uncomfortably clear. The things that irritate us most strongly in others are often the very things we haven't confronted in ourselves. This isn't always the case. Some people genuinely are arrogant, genuinely are unreliable. But the intensity of your reaction, the way it follows you from one person to the next, the way certain types always seem to find you, that's the shadow's signature. Real perception of someone else's flaws doesn't have that charged quality. Projection does. In relationships, this becomes particularly destructive. When you carry unprocessed fear of abandonment, you don't just worry about being abandoned. You read abandonment into neutral behavior. A partner who needs space becomes threatening. Silence becomes rejection. An ordinary disagreement becomes confirmation that you were never truly loved. you aren't responding to what's actually happening. You're responding to the story your shadow is telling about what's happening, and you're creating conflict and distance and pain, not because of what the other person did, but because of what you haven't yet faced. Epictetus wrote, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." Projection is exactly this, the opinion formed by your shadow rather than the thing itself. Your response to someone's words or actions is filtered through every unacknowledged wound, every unexamined belief, every piece of yourself you've refused to look at. Remove those filters, and your perception clears. The distortions fall away. You see people as they are rather than as your shadow needs them to be. Reclaiming this clarity is not about eliminating emotional responses to others. It's about developing the honesty to ask, in moments of strong reaction, what is this showing me about myself? Not as self-punishment, not as a way of dismissing genuine problems in others, but as a practice of looking inward first. Every time you do that, you recover a piece of your perception that the shadow had claimed. And with clearer perception comes cleaner choice. You can respond to what's real rather than react to what you're projecting. When projection stops, manipulation loses much of its power. You can no longer be triggered into reactions based on false readings of a situation. You can no longer be pushed into patterns by people who have learned which wounds to press. You see clearly, and in that clarity, you are considerably harder to move, ready to stop blaming others and take full responsibility for your life. Comment this now. I own my feelings, not blame. Fear is the chain that holds the shadow in place. Of all the ways the shadow asserts its influence, fear is the most efficient. It doesn't need to manufacture elaborate situations or complex triggers. It simply makes you hesitate, comply, shrink, or avoid. And in that moment of hesitation, the shadow consolidates its hold. Fear in the context of the shadow is almost never about genuine physical danger. It's the fear of judgment, of rejection, of being seen clearly and found lacking. Fear of standing alone. Fear of expressing something true and having it dismissed. Fear of reaching for something and failing in front of others. These fears live in the shadow because they are built from the same material, the wounds, the insecurities, the parts of yourself that never received enough care or acceptance to feel safe. And the critical thing about these fears is that they operate below the level of conscious decision-making. You don't decide to hold back your opinion in a meeting because you've rationally weighed the risks. You hold back because something in you, something fast and pre-rational, signals danger before your conscious mind has even fully formed the thought. The shadow has already made the call. This is what makes fear such an effective leash. It doesn't feel like control from the outside. It feels like your own sensible caution. It feels like reading the room correctly, being realistic, knowing your limits. But the test is whether the fear is specific and situational, or whether it follows you everywhere, into new jobs, new relationships, new opportunities, attaching itself to different objects, but serving the same function of keeping you small and predictable. When fear keeps you predictable, others, consciously or not, can rely on it. They know which topics you'll deflect, which confrontations you'll back down from, which requests you'll comply with to avoid conflict. Your shadow becomes a map that others can navigate even when you can't read it yourself. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." This is the architecture of shadow-based fear precisely. The imagined consequence, the rejection, the judgment, the failure, is almost always worse than anything that would actually occur. The shadow sustains itself partly by inflating those imagined consequences, keeping the feared outcome looming large enough that you never test it against reality. Each time you avoid the feared thing, the shadow's version of it grows a little more powerful, a little more definitive, a little more controlling. Facing fear doesn't mean the absence of discomfort. It means moving through the discomfort with awareness of where it's coming from. When you recognize that the fear is old, that it belongs to a wound rather than a present threat, it begins to lose its authority. Not immediately, not always easily, but steadily. You stop mistaking the shadow's alarm system for accurate information about the present moment. What opens up on the other side of this is significant. Choices that were previously foreclosed become available. Conversations you would have avoided become possible. Parts of yourself that were sealed off by fear start to surface, not as threats, but as resources. The anger you were afraid to feel, once acknowledged, becomes clarity. The sadness you suppressed, once expressed, becomes relief. The desire you judged as dangerous, once examined honestly, becomes direction. Fear, when you stop running from it, stops being the chain. It becomes, as Jung observed, a pointer, showing you exactly where the shadow is concentrated, exactly where the work needs to go. Shadow integration is where real power lives. There is a common misunderstanding about what shadow work is actually for. Many people approach it as a form of damage control, a way to identify the bad parts of yourself so you can eliminate or manage them. That framing misses the depth of what Jung was pointing to, and it misses where the actual power is located. The shadow is not a collection of defects. It is a collection of everything that was pushed out of the conscious personality. And that includes qualities, capacities, and energies that were never defective to begin with. They were simply inconvenient or threatening to the image you needed to maintain, or incompatible with what your environment expected of you. Ambition that was labeled as selfishness, assertiveness that was labeled as aggression, sensitivity that was labeled as weakness, creativity that was labeled as impractical. These aren't flaws. They're parts of you that got filed away because they didn't fit. And in the shadow, they've been accumulating, sometimes distorting into symptoms like rage or resentment or self-sabotage, but fundamentally still containing the original energy. When you integrate the shadow, you don't just neutralize its negative influence. You reclaim that energy and bring it back into your functioning self. This is what Jung meant when he described shadow integration as a path toward wholeness, rather than merely toward better behavior. The goal isn't a thinner, tamer version of yourself, it's a fuller one. A person who has acknowledged their anger is not angrier than one who has suppressed it. They are cleaner because the anger isn't leaking sideways into passive aggression or sudden explosions or the cold withdrawal that poisons relationships slowly. They can use the energy of that anger as information and as force when it's genuinely needed. Integration requires a specific quality of attention, not analysis. The shadow doesn't yield to being merely thought about. It requires something more like direct encounter, sitting with the feeling, not the story about the feeling, letting the shame or grief or rage actually be present without immediately explaining it away or turning it into a narrative. This is uncomfortable. It's meant to be. The discomfort is the shadow's energy finding its way through. Marcus Aurelius observed, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This is precisely the logic of integration. The shadow, properly encountered, does not stay as an obstacle. It becomes material. The fear that stopped you from expressing yourself once faced becomes confidence. The grief you never allowed yourself to feel, once felt, becomes compassion for yourself and for others. The parts you've been most ashamed of, once acknowledged without judgment, become the foundation of your most authentic strength. Integration also changes the way you move through the world in social and professional terms. When someone attempts to manipulate you through shame, and shame is something you've already walked through and made peace with, that approach has no traction. When someone tries to reach you through fear of failure, and you've already sat with that fear and seen it clearly, it loses its power to paralyze. The points of leverage others once had simply stop working. Not because you've become hard or defensive, but because the wounds have healed enough that they're no longer open access points. This is not a process with a clear endpoint. Integration is ongoing, the shadow has layers, and life continues to generate new experiences that push new material into it. But each stage of genuine integration makes you more coherent, more recognizable to yourself, more capable of acting from your actual values rather than from fear or compulsion. The accumulated effect of this work is what sovereignty actually looks like. Not the performance of confidence, but the quiet solidity of someone who knows themselves, ready to stop hiding from your darkness and use it as fuel. Comment this now: I turn my darkness into power. Self-awareness is the practice, not the destination. There is a version of self-awareness that functions as decoration, the vocabulary of introspection used to signal sophistication without doing the actual work. Knowing the terminology, identifying the patterns in others, speaking fluently about trauma and triggers while remaining essentially unchanged. This is the shadow's most elegant trick, turning the tools of awareness into another layer of avoidance. Real self-awareness is not comfortable and it's not static. It's an ongoing practice of honest observation that changes you as it goes. It requires returning repeatedly to the question of what is actually happening inside you versus what you're telling yourself is happening. These are often different things. The practice begins with something simple but demanding: the pause. In the moment when a strong emotion surfaces, when you feel the heat of irritation, the tightening of anxiety, the sting of shame, instead of following the automatic response, you stop and look. What is this? Where is it coming from? Is it proportionate to what just happened, or is it reaching back into something older? That pause is the insertion point of consciousness into a process that previously ran entirely on its own. Over time, consistent practice with that pause builds something substantial. You begin to map your own interior. You learn which situations reliably produce which reactions, and you start to see the underlying structure, the wound beneath the trigger, the fear beneath the anger, the longing beneath the resentment. This mapping is not abstract. It's felt knowledge, earned by actually staying present with difficult internal states rather than immediately moving to manage or distract from them. Epictetus wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Self-awareness in the context of shadow work is exactly this: determining what you actually are before deciding how to act. Not what you wish you were, not what you perform in public, but what is genuinely present in you in this moment. That honesty is the precondition for any real change. Without it, you are adjusting the surface while the structure underneath remains intact. One of the practical consequences of developed self-awareness is the ability to distinguish between your response and your reaction. A reaction is automatic. It comes from the shadow's programming, from old wounds and unexamined beliefs, and it often overshoots the present situation because it's partially addressed at the past. A response is conscious. It emerges from your actual assessment of the present moment, informed by but not enslaved to your emotional history. The difference matters enormously in relationships, in professional environments, in any high-stakes situation. Someone who is reacting can be manipulated relatively easily. Press the right button and the response is predictable. Someone who is responding is far more difficult to move, not because they are emotionally flat, but because their emotions are passing through their awareness before becoming actions. There is a gap between stimulus and behavior, and in that gap lives their freedom. This practice also builds a kind of credibility with yourself that is difficult to acquire any other way. When you observe yourself honestly over time, acknowledging the moments you were wrong, the moments your shadow was driving, the moments you acted from fear when you told yourself you were being principled, you develop a clearer picture of what you actually are capable of and what work remains. This is not self-criticism, it's self-knowledge, which is something considerably more useful. The shadow loses influence in direct proportion to how clearly it's seen, not confronted with hostility, not suppressed with discipline, but simply observed with honesty. Consistent self-awareness is the mechanism through which that observation becomes a daily practice rather than an occasional crisis response. Ready to see yourself clearly and finally act from truth. Comment this now. I see clearly and act wisely. Freedom is an inside job. Everything built to this point converges here. The shadow, the projections, the fear, the integration, the self-awareness. They all point toward the same conclusion. The freedom you're looking for is not circumstantial. It is not waiting for the right relationship, the right amount of money, the right recognition, the right set of external conditions. Those things may matter, and pursuing them is legitimate, but they cannot deliver what only inner work can provide. This is the part most people resist, because it means taking full responsibility for your own experience in a way that's genuinely uncomfortable. It's easier to identify external causes. It's more socially legible to point at what was done to you, what the system has denied you, what other people have failed to provide. And some of those things are real and deserve acknowledgement. But even when external causes are real, the inner response to them, the meaning you make, the patterns you build, the walls you construct, those are yours, and they remain yours to examine and change. Jung was unambiguous on this. The degree to which you project your shadow outward is the degree to which you remain subject to forces that seem outside your control. Every unowned piece of yourself that you see reflected in the external world is another tether. The world didn't create most of those tethers. Your unexplored inner life did, and only you can address them. What changes when this work is genuinely done? The most immediate shift is in reactivity. Events and people that would have previously destabilized you simply don't carry the same charge, not because you've become indifferent, but because the wound they used to touch has been acknowledged and processed. The criticism that used to devastate, it still registers, you still consider it, but it no longer collapses you. The praise that used to inflate, you can receive it without building your sense of self on it. You are not impervious, you are grounded. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." In the shadow work context, the bravery he is pointing to is the willingness to look at yourself without the usual protections. This is a specific kind of courage that has nothing to do with external displays of strength and everything to do with the willingness to sit with discomfort, uncertainty, and genuine self-examination. The freedom that follows is equally specific, not freedom from all difficulty or pain, but freedom from the unconscious compulsions that previously made you predictable, manipulable, and fundamentally less than fully yourself. This freedom shows up in the texture of daily life in ways that are subtle but significant. Decisions that used to feel impossibly fraught become clearer because you're no longer trying to simultaneously satisfy your actual needs and the demands of your unacknowledged fears. Relationships become more honest because you're no longer using other people as screens for your projections or as substitutes for your own unmet needs. Your work becomes more aligned with what you actually value because the judgment and fear that used to crowd out your genuine inclinations have lost their grip. The people who cannot reach you once your shadow is healed are specifically the ones who were reaching you through it. The emotional manipulator who knew how to activate your fear of abandonment. The authority figure who exploited your internalized shame. The relationship that worked because it confirmed your shadow's worst story about yourself. These dynamics lose their power not because you become cold or guarded, but because what they were leveraging no longer exists in the same form. This is the practical meaning of sovereignty, not dominance over others, not immunity to life's difficulties, but genuine self-direction. Your choices emerge from your actual values and honest understanding of a situation rather than from the shadow's automated responses. You are, in the most concrete sense, more present in your own life. And that presence, that capacity to be actually there, in your experience, making real choices, is what nobody can take from you once you've claimed it. Ready to stop searching outside and claim the freedom that was always within you? Comment this now. My freedom starts inside me. What Jung uncovered in a lifetime of clinical work and deep self-examination comes down to something that is at once simple and demanding. The parts of yourself you refuse to face are the parts that control you. The shadow is not a flaw in human psychology. It is an inevitable product of being a conscious being shaped by a world that demands conformity. Every person has one. The question is only whether yours remains in the dark, running your life from behind the scenes, or whether you turn toward it with enough honesty and courage to change the relationship. The work is real. It doesn't happen in a weekend seminar or through a series of affirmations. It happens in the accumulated moments of genuine self-observation. The pause before the automatic reaction, the honest question about what a strong feeling is really pointing to, the willingness to sit with shame or grief or anger long enough to understand it rather than escape it. It happens in the slow process of reclaiming projected material from the external world and recognizing it as your own. It happens in the quiet courage of facing the fears that have been making your decisions for you. What this work produces is not a fixed state of enlightenment, it's an ongoing capacity, a practiced ability to see yourself clearly enough that you are no longer blindly operated by what you haven't examined. The shadow will always be part of your psychology. Integration doesn't eliminate it, it changes your relationship to it. You stop being its subject and begin being its student. The material it contains, the old wounds, the suppressed energy, the disowned capacities, becomes something you can work with rather than something that works you. The Stoics understood something adjacent to this, that the only domain in which you are genuinely sovereign is your own inner life. External events, other people's behavior, the conditions of the world, these are not in your full control, but how you meet them, what you bring to them, what patterns you allow to persist or choose to examine, that is yours. The shadow, unhealed, narrows that sovereign territory considerably. Every unexamined wound is a point of entry for whatever the world wants to put there. Every integrated piece of yourself is territory reclaimed. The path toward nobody controlling you is not the path toward becoming hard or isolated or unaffected by life. It is the path toward becoming so genuinely acquainted with yourself that there is nothing hidden left to exploit. Your fears are known to you. Your wounds have been looked at. Your shadow is not a stranger operating in the dark. It is a part of yourself you have chosen to understand. That understanding is the work of a lifetime, and it begins with the simplest and most difficult act available to you, turning toward the parts of yourself you have been most reluctant to face, and looking at them honestly. The freedom you find there belongs entirely to you, ready to be unstoppable and fully in charge of your life. Comment this now. I'm unstoppable and fully in charge.